By 1945, war had reshaped the world. Nations stood on the edge of exhaustion. The skies above Europe a silent witness to the struggle. Night after night, bombers carved through the darkness, entire squadrons vanishing into the void, guided only by flickering lights on distant horizons. Among them was Jack Laffoley, one airman in one squadron flying thousands of miles from home. His mission was one of many, his fate one of thousands. But the echoes of that night did not fade. They reached across oceans, across generations, carried by those determined to keep his memory alive. As the events of Operation Gisela unfolded, Germany's final desperate attempt to turn the tide of war played out in the shadows. Jack's story is one of sacrifice, but also remembrance. A light, long extinguished, yet still seen through the window of history. Who was he? What happened in the skies that night? And why does his legacy endure? Gisela, Echoes of a Sacrifice. RAF Bomber Command initially favoured daytime bombing, but after heavy losses in the Battle of the Heligoland Bight, 1939, they switched to night raids. Early attempts were largely ineffective, more symbolic than strategic. The Luftwaffe launched intruder missions against returning Allied bombers, but without airborne radar, success was rare. Hitler halted these operations in 1941, believing downing bombers over Germany was better for morale. By late 1944, Germany faced severe fuel shortages. The Luftwaffe struggled to defend German airspace, and calls to resume intruder operations grew. Desperate, Hitler and Goering approved Operation Gisela, an attempt to strike Allied bombers returning to England.
Operation Gisela, or Gisela, whichever way you want to pronounce it. Gisela is the German pronunciation. It's a fascinating aspect of World War II history. The fact that this operation was mounted on the night of the 4th of March 1945, the last-ditch effort by the Luftwaffe to thwart Bomber Command's activities, and the fact that it was a Ju-88 piloted by Hauptmann Johann Dreyer and his crew who attacked a French squadron, Halifax, returning to base here at Elvington.
At 2300 hours, Ju-88 night fighters took off, flying low over the North Sea to avoid detection. Their orders, attack only over England.
And my father was a rear gunner with Squadron 346. They were based, it was a French squadron based at Elvington, and there was Squadron 346 and 347. When they came back, like the Raphael Masson, who was a gunner from the other aircraft, when they passed, well, they did see a lot of crashes, because they knew there were some bandits, as they used to say. And they saw some crashes during the night over England, and they thought it was airplanes that crashed there. And when they flew over Elvington, everything was dark, and they said it was bandits, so they had to go somewhere else. But unfortunately, they didn't have the petrol. So they said, well, you go to Croft. And that's where they went, and it was lit up then. They started go downwind, ready for landing. They got the plane ready, and then everything, all the lights went off because the Junker came around the way. So they managed to land, all dark it was, and they got shot at, but it missed them. So they parked between two Lancasters, they said, and then they waited, and then they saw some flames. They didn't know who it was, but it was, as it happened, it was my father's airplane. And they saw it crash, and they said, well, he got it all right. And when they went back to the tower, my father's crew with Captain Notel, they arrived at the same time. They were all alive, and a bit of injuries, especially the captain flying. He was the pilot, and my father a little bit as well. But they stayed 1 month off and went back on missions on the 2nd of April. So it was just 1 month.
By 0045, Alerts were issued, but many bombers had no time to react. At RAF Winthorpe, Ju-88s struck aircraft illuminated by landing lights. Lieutenant Arnold Doering used Schrager music cannons, the upward-firing cannons seen here, to destroy 2 bombers before strafing a train.
Dreyer was chasing this French 347 squadron, Halifax, piloted by Captain Notel and his crew. They were warned just before the imminent attack, so they managed to pull up and divert to Croft. They were attacked there again en route 3 times by another Ju-88. Feldwebel Schmidt was the pilot. Their aircraft was brought down. Thankfully, Paul Notel managed to land the aircraft in a belly landing, and although the aircraft was disintegrated, miraculously the 7 crew escaped. Notel had injuries to his nose and shoulder, he broke his nose and his shoulder. Lucien Mallier, the rear gunner, suffered burns to his hands and face, but survived. 2 other crews had slight injuries, but they all survived. 2 other French squadron Halifaxes were not so fortunate.
Continuing his attack, Dreyer made a strafing pass on Dunnington Lodge, a farmhouse on the edge of the airfield. For reasons not clearly known, he clipped a tree and crashed through one section of the building at 1:51 a.m., killing farmer Richard Moll, his wife Helen and daughter-in-law, Violet, whose husband Fred Moll saved the life of their 3-year-old son Edgar, fighting his way to the outside. The Ju-88 ended up at the junction of the Elvington and Dunnington roads. All 4 of the crew perished. 5 of Jack Laffoley's crew died when his plane crashed at Spellow Hill. Bill Kay survived to tell his story in 1987.
And when we got on the circuit at Dishworth, there were 2 aircraft burning on the ground in the circuit. And we did about a circuit and a half, calling them up, and they wouldn't answer from the tower. And next second, there was a rattle and we were on fire. This bloke had just slipped in underneath us and given us a burst from his upward firing cannons. And we both starboard engines and the tanks on fire. So there was no chance of the plane lasting more than a few seconds. And when I got to the back door, I had a job to get my parachute hooked on my clips on the chest, on the harness. I did that eventually. And I couldn't find the door handle because I lost my night vision, you see. So the chap who was second pilot that night, Ken Palmer, it was his first trip, and he was a pilot. And he'd been in the rest position when we were hit, so he hadn't seen the fire outside. When he saw me struggling to find the door, he just pushed me on one side, opened the bloody door, and out he went. And I followed him damn quick.
By 2:15 a.m., the surviving German fighters retreated, but British radio jamming left them disoriented. Each of these round markers represents an Allied forces crash. All the Gisela losses were over England. German losses are represented by the black and white crosses. Most of those were over Europe, as they were chased by RAF Mosquitoes and struggled with worsening weather, high winds and snow, or ran out of fuel. Though a surprise, Operation Gisela failed strategically. It caused losses. 70 Allied airmen killed in the returning bomber stream, a total of 98, including the crew from 5 Lancasters on diversionary operations. But the Luftwaffe lost 45 experienced pilots, a devastating blow. Among the Allied airmen who paid the ultimate price was Jack Laffoley. But Jack was more than just a casualty of war. He was a son, a friend, and a comrade. To truly understand the weight of his sacrifice, we turn to those who have kept his memory alive.
I guess the story started 80 years ago at RAF Melbourne, the home of 10 Squadron, where my father and Jack Laffoley flew. The echoes began for me with this model, this crew, and that name of Jack Laffoley. That meant so much to my father that 75 years later, just before he died, he arranged to have a puppy placed on Jack's name at the International Bomber Command Centre in Lincoln.
But I think this one that we've got going now in Lincoln, I think is a better idea really. Between, there's going to be the monument and there's going to be a garden of remembrance where people could walk. And I think it's more, shall I say, homely. It's a better feeling for people to go and be able to just walk. I'm not saying that because I'm talking to you and you're going to give me front page.
I discovered that my father's bombardier, Albert Hodkinson DFM, was alive and thriving in Philadelphia at 101, and amazingly had been in contact with and become a great friend of Ross Oliver, Jack Laffoley's nephew. So the echoes began to focus.
Every time he went bombing, he flew right up front, and he would lead the way, as you might say, and he would be one of the first to come back and land and tell the story of what happened at the bombing place. We both started together, and we were once the letter arrived, my crew went at it, Laffoley's crew went at it. We kept together because Laffoley and Grant wanted to go back to Canada to that party that the father had promised.
He came so close to coming home. I mean, he was hours away from coming home. He was on his 33rd mission, and he died just outside his own airdrome. So, you know, that was a pretty big blow to everyone who knew the story. And I did more research as I got older and found different people who were still alive. They were very close to him. Some of them were British, and some of them were, you know, American and Canadian. And, you know, these guys kept photos of him on the wall. And I was like, well, you know, there must have been a really, you know, deep relationship to maintain that story all these decades.
Laffoley was such a big memory for my father that of all the people during the war, he used to talk about you and the crew that he flew with in V Victor, and only ever one other name, and that name was Jack Laffoley. And I understand that when Ross Oliver, Jack's nephew, came to see you, you had a photograph on the wall, didn't you?
Yes, I did, yeah, Jack Laffoley.
We had the diary that he had written from the beginning of 1944 up in Scotland and to the day he died, 2 days before he died, in 45. And that daily diary, you know, depicts everything that happened to him day to day, you know, where he went, what he did, who he was writing home to, and the missions he took. He named every one of them. This was a young guy who was 20 to 22, and every second entry he was, you know, worried about his success, not only for the mission that he was on, but for the people he was in command of. You know, he was always questioning to be sure that he was worthy of doing the task.
And on top of it, they were kind of exciting days, but they were terrible days. Some of the young lads didn't get a chance. Good pilot. Oh, you can be the best pilot in the world, and they can take it out. Yeah. You know, and that he was in that capacity, and he paid the price for some reason.
Every birthday she had, which was November 1st, each year, flowers would come to her door. You know, and eventually we asked, well, who are they from? Well, she says, they're from my son. He made sure that I received flowers ad infinitum with the pay that he had accumulated during the war.
2 crews, flying the same operations, expecting to complete at the same time, bonded together. Unfortunately, Jack's plane was damaged. My father completed his tour. He and Jack had shared so many experiences, and they were expecting to enjoy a great party in Montreal. But they didn't share that experience because Operation Gisela happened.
The pain of Jack's loss was felt especially by his family. They planned on hosting a party for Jack. Instead, they commemorated him through a stained glass window in Canada. Decades after that tragic flight, an extraordinary tribute is taking shape once more. John Bailey is recreating a stained glass window, this time on British soil.
When you sit with someone over breakfast and you hear the research they're doing into their father's involvement in the war effort, and you hear the stories, and then you're confronted with evidence and documents to show the reality of what these young men and women went through. We just had to do something to mark the occasion.
Once the skies over Europe were battlefields, today those divisions have faded, replaced by a shared understanding of the courage and loss endured by all who took to the air.
So I see this picture of this man. Well, who is this? And of course, that's Jack. And so his mother talks to me about who Jack is, who Jack was. For her, Jack is still alive, and she talks about him as if, you know, he's still there, and how amazing person he was as a brother. And every time his mother would also speak about him, I get a feel that it was, like I said, sometimes you hear people, once they're passed away, they're larger than life. But in his case, it was really the real thing. Jack Laffoley was the real thing. And for me, as a young aspiring pilot, it was really an amazing motivation for me, because he was so young. He was my age, actually, 21, 22, doing all these things, that it inspired me to join the armed forces.
I'm Canadian. I joined the Army to become a U.S. citizen and to help me pay for school. And I got into flight school. And so I went to flight school down in Alabama to learn how to fly Apache helicopters. And my dad got in touch with me. He said, you know, we've been tracking down things about Grant's brother, who I knew he had passed in World War II. I knew he had been a pilot, but I didn't know a lot else. When I graduated from flight school, my aunt Barb gave me Jack's I have Jack's wings, and I was allowed to wear them on my dress uniform as like a family remembrance.
In the fire-bombed ruins of Coventry Cathedral, 3 medieval nails were bound together to form a cross, now known as the Cross of Nails. Decades later, the Cross of Nails stands as a reminder that even in the darkest moments of conflict, the path to peace is possible.
I have walked a very privileged and honoured pathway with World War II air gunner veterans who reconciled and made a friendship with the German Night Fighter Pilots Association. Over 30 years ago, I was introduced to the 2 groups. They had lost their bases for meeting up. So we brought both groups into a civilian environment for the very first time. And they were nervous. They came on a 54-seater bus, and the Germans said, do you think they'll throw tomatoes at the bus? But what everyone saw from the onset was the friendship and the reconciliation that enemies can form. They can forgive. And in all the years that I travelled with them, I never heard any arguments. I never heard any horrible stories of war. They talked tactics, but how can we stop it from happening again? So it's been a privilege and an honour.
My purpose is the reconciliation part. I'm doing things together with Jackie Whitehead and the Flight Path of Friendship Reconciliation Group since a school project in 2009. And with this group, I've visited the Air Museum and Dunning Lodge Farmhouse for the first time in 2018. We stood there at the little cross at the street, read the names of the Moll family who was killed in Unternehmen Gisela, and as well of the crew of the Junkers airplane, to remember both sides, the German and the British.
My dad, last time he was here visiting, we talked a lot about legacy and remembering things. I'm going to get emotional talking about it, but I think it's very important that you're putting the time in to do this, because I don't want it to end with us either. I want the story to continue, and I want people to know, and I want to be able to pass it. But oh, sorry. Sometimes I feel like I don't know enough to tell the next generation, or when I have kids, like, how am I supposed to explain to them all of this? And I think it's very important.
There is a Jewish saying, a person is not dead as long as their name is spoken. So I think the part of the legacy and the reconciliation and remembering their names and tell their stories is the thing we as the new generation could do to keep memories alive.
This year marks the 80th anniversary of Operation Gisela, a night that claimed many lives, including that of Jack Laffoley. Yet, through the work of friends, family, and historians, his story endures. The stained glass window at the Yorkshire Air Museum is more than just coloured glass. It's a testament to memory and sacrifice, as well as a bridge connecting the past to the present, Canada to Britain, and one century to another.
I began to understand the echoes. Why was this man so important? Well, my father and Jack had shared their youth, they shared the experiences of war, and then I find they shared a birthday, the 6th of December. The plane that Jack was shot down in carried the same markings as my father's plane, V Victor, this model. And so, in remembrance of my father and of Jack, I decided to make this legacy. A sense of purpose shared with everyone who's contributed to it, recognising that we are looking at a speck against the Second World War. One death out of 55,000 Allied Air Force casualties, 26,000 American Air Force casualties, 138,000 Luftwaffe casualties. A speck against that backdrop, but together we look at it through that stained glass window with Jack pointing to the sky, to all of them.